Thank you. Can everybody hear me back there? Good. So I'm going to talk today about a project that really I'm just getting started on, and you'll see that in what I present. When Noreen sent an email and asked me if I would come, I thought, I can't come now. I'm just starting these projects. I don't have anything to present. And then she said, we heard you have a daughter here, and she didn't know that it was about my daughter's birthday. And I thought, what mother can't come when she's invited to? So I am here, as is my daughter, the birthday girl. But I just want to, so it's going to be a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about just a question that I'm interested in and that I don't have all the data for, and then talk to you about sort of the data that we are collecting in the 2013 PSID. So data to be forthcoming. But I will start just sort of with my slide on why might one be interested in intergenerational family transfers, in my case transfers of time and money. And if I think about it, there's sort of at least four aspects that brought me to be interested in this. One is certainly all of us can be affected positively or negatively, I guess, but in terms of transfers, we all need time. We need assistance at certain stages of the life course. Particularly, we read a lot now about the slow launch to young adulthood. That's one of the stages where often what families are able to do or not able to do is consequential. And then there's a big literature in gerontology about sort of end-of-life kind of transfers. So it certainly affects our well-being, who we're connected to, and what resources they have to help us, or what they need in terms of what we have to give them. Secondly, though, particularly if I have policy people, I mean, this is a question that's really at the nexus of a lot of public policy questions, because what gets provided privately within the family, some estimates would say it dwarfs what is provided publicly, particularly in terms of old age assistance if you were to value it. And there are lots of issues about, are you going to, what substitution and complementarity, are you going to crowd in support, crowd out support? So having good information on the private provision is connected to sort of what we know and what we want to think about in terms of the public provision of family support. Certainly, transfers of time and money and other goods are implicated in intergenerational inheritance and well-being across the generations. And something that we've been thinking about a lot, it's really hard to capture the fact that it's not only the giving of a transfer or the receiving of a transfer. Sometimes it's knowing that you could get the transfer or you could receive the transfer, this kind of family safety net that may affect what you feel like you're able to do. So I think of it in terms of, in young adulthood, if I know that I could come to my parents if I got stuck, I could think about taking a riskier path to early on. I can try more things perhaps than if I don't know that I can call on a family. So lots of those things have motivated a number of us to turn to, and the difficulty for me is once you turn to be interested in this, the data are trickier and not as readily available, because now we're often talking, a lot of our survey, the stuff that demographers use, the large-scale surveys, are household-based. And here you're talking often about a relationship that almost by definition often extend across households. And so you really would like to sample the relationship, but that's not how our sampling frames usually are set up. So what I want to do in the presentation is actually, I want to start and be more concrete and describe sort of a topic that I'm interested in, and it comes from my interest in work, family, and gender roles. But I'm reading a lot about the sandwich generation. I'm maybe more interested in this now because I'm sort of there, the right age ranges to worry about this. But who's sandwiched between parents and adult children, potentially? And so in some ways, this is a question where what I'm able to do now is I'm starting to think about the denominators. There's a small literature on the sandwich generation. It's often not very careful, but in some sense, I can't be sandwiched unless I have surviving parents and I have kids. So even being careful about, how many of us are at, and then how might this be changing? How might the demographics be changing this? And my goal, though, is eventually to get to be able to estimate not only who's at risk, but who actually gives at 2 generations. And use that to kind of segue into just to describe for you what's really, really preliminary, which is new data collection on transfers of time and money that we have funding for and we've developed, and that will provide, in some sense, if I think about it, the numerators of what I'm interested in for analysis of the sandwich generation. And it also provides us with kind of a broader research agenda. The collection is planned for the 2013 PSID, funded by NIA, and the funding's in hand, so it will happen. And I do have some just preliminary pretest estimates from a survey we did this summer, a survey of consumers. Okay. So, people feel free to interrupt at any point.
Are you defining the sandwich generation by age or by the presence of adult children and living parents?
Right now I'm just saying, let me look at 50 to 64-year-olds, and let me start by trying to figure out how many of them have living parents and have children.
It seems like that's going to understate the incidence for groups with
early childbearing.
Yeah.
One of the things I think we're going to do is bring that age down, because I do want to look at black-white differences, and I'm exactly worried about that, because you may have been sandwiched, but your parents are already deceased by the time. It's not just fertility; it's also mortality, right? You had your kids young, and you were sandwiched in the 40s, and so that's yeah.
Why not define it just by the presence of living parents and adult children?
It's a good question. I'm part of the reason I'm looking at this age is we have kind of another interest, which is these would be the ages for women when they're starting to have to think about retirement, or they may be heading towards retirement. And so if sandwiching, or if caregiving needs more than money needs has any implications for their labor force participation, you might see behaviors that will be good for their people they're caring for, but detrimental to them heading into retirement. So that was partly why we're centered on here. But I'm actually really worried about the question you have, and that may be something that you find problematic about the race comparison here. But for this one, I'm going to show you the differences for black and white women in those age ranges, and I'm thinking about their well-being.
You're not looking at the Hispanic population, right?
No, because it's not because I don't want to.
No, I know, PSID.
Yeah.
Yeah. That has to do with the timing of childcare and also the tendency to double up.
Right.
And so to the fourth. So you're going to miss a huge part. But this is also the baby boom generation, 50 to 64. You're capturing a large segment of the baby boom who may behave differently, and we have a lot of savings.
I'm going to not just look at the baby boom. Eventually I want to look at their parents too. It's a PSID.
Right.
So sort of how did it change across cohorts?
Okay.
But I agree with you. You're saying, they did things differently. Yeah. Betsy,
I was just going to say, why adult children? Could it be children younger than adults?
Yeah, actually, when I show you this thing, it's going to be any children. But in terms of the transfer stuff that we're going to talk about, that's going to be collected on adult children. The presumption is you are supporting anybody under 18 because you have to. They're probably still living with you. So maybe I should, it should be any. The at-risk thing, though, I am interested in any children.
Is not just
The sandwich generation aren't people that just have adult children. They could have younger children. Yeah.
And then the other group that
Sorry.
you might find people who are sandwiched between they're participating in the care of their grandchildren and the care of their own elderly parents.
Yeah. Actually, I'm using sandwich because, everybody uses it, but it's really
really what you're-
slippery.
yeah.
No, but I think somebody needs to do some good. We just did this PAA abstract and I'm doing this work with Emily Weimers, who's an economist at UMass Boston, who was a postdoc at PSID. But we've been saying, I said, this stuff is really slippery all over the place. So we tried to sort of start removing the word, but everybody's talking about it. So anyway, okay, okay. So what I really want to ask is, has the likelihood of having potential, so it's potential here, obligations to both your parents and your children of any age, as Betsy just points out, has that changed over time? And how would a demographer start to think about it? So the first thing, so let's just think about mortality and fertility and marriage. And so how should we be thinking about what should changes in mortality be doing over time? Well, it seemed to me that the obvious one is we should think that sort of longer life expectancy, right, would increase the likelihood that you're going to have surviving parents at those older ages. And so a bigger proportion should be at risk, at least, of having to provide to parents. And of course, that's going to vary by socioeconomic status and by race, as Marta and Diva have just suggested. But and I think mortality is the easiest one to think about, but even it's not so easy because we're also, if there's an increase in healthy life expectancy, yes, you may be at risk because you have those living parents, but you may not actually be called to provide because they're healthier. And so in some sense, one would ideally want to know the health status and be thinking about that as well. I think fertility is even more complicated, at least for me to think about. The first thing is, so there should be, if there's fewer children and more childlessness, that should cut down, right? That should be sort of diminishing the proportion of women who would have children and would have children's needs to fill. But if there's timing, and usually in this changes, so usually in this sandwich literature, what you read about is there is a delayed childbearing, the trend towards delayed childbearing. So if you have your children later, they're more likely to be teenagers or not fully launched young adults when you're older and when your parents aren't yet, your parents have lived a long time and are still around. But I've started to think about this timing thing across cohorts is good. So I went into it thinking, and having delayed childbearing is going to be more true of the highly educated and whites than it is of the less educated and of Hispanics or blacks. So there'll be those kinds of racial differences. But we're looking kind of across two cohorts, and I've started to think about that actually it's timing of the last birth that one should be thinking about. And that's actually, I'm not sure, has changed as dramatically across, at least from the parents of the baby boom to the baby boomers. I'm going to give an anecdotal example, but my mother started her childbearing at age 22. I started mine at age 32. I finished mine at age 38. She finished hers not that much earlier than me, 35. I had 3 kids, she had 6. So across cohorts, this timing of kind of the last birth may have changed less than we first see when we have this timing of the first birth. And in fact, this whole discussion of the elongated transition out of the household, just keep reflecting on what my father used to say is, I just got them all out and somebody's back home. And and that was a generation before us. So, and then the last thing though is this kind of thing. How long do children need to be supported? Did that change? Did my father have to support people just as long as now, or have we really seen an elongated transition?
I think you're right about the last birth, but the number of births. So if you have 6 kids, you can share the burden of the parent support. So there's a redistribution there, and if you're siblings had more kids as well. So, I mean, I think it's not just one focal event that's going to help you understand it. If fertility has declined by 50% or more during within a cohort
Right.
age, then that's going to affect the support demands for the mothers, for the parents.
You're saying, because each woman will have fewer sisters in the later cohort with whom to share caregiving burdens. Maybe no sisters or only a brother who, yeah, 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 yeah. Where does that leave you?
And I think a lot of the evidence suggests that even when they're, regardless of the number of children, the caregiving burden often falls on one child. So it's just that you didn't have the option of putting it off on somebody else if you were, I mean, I don't know that having 6 kids means that it reduces the burden on the 6 equally.
Not equally, but
The,
could be fair.
yeah. I mean, I think my own feeling is that parents are going to be okay because somebody's going to do it. It's just going to be, and this is based somewhat on evidence. Altanji's work with the 88 PSID, from the point of view of kids, when you have 6 kids, fewer of them have to be the one providing. Parents got care, and that didn't vary by family size. Parents got it. They just got it from 1 of 2 or 1 of 6. Somebody gave it. But from the kid's point of view, the family size did matter. Your likelihood of being the caregiver was definitely higher if you're in a small family than if you're in a large family. And one thing I'm not going to actually even get to the interesting stuff. I would argue that we don't even now have very good, we have some point in time estimates of who might be at risk, but nobody's really got a very good solid on the kin availability and how that's changed over time, even as all these demographics have changed. So I'm going to show you, I want to look at the PSID. Emily and I are looking at the PSID, 2 cohorts, strategically picked 88 and in 2000, it will be 2013, because we're also going to have time and money transfer data at those points in time eventually, but right now we only have it for 88. So I'm just looking kind of at who's at risk. Can I get a good estimate who's at risk change? Because I feel like some of these things are working at cross purposes, you know? I mean, some things would make you less likely to be at risk, other things would make you more likely to be at risk of having both. The final one I want to just look at briefly is marriage. If you think about how much marriage has changed, because what marriage does is it brings you obligations to more parents, you could argue. So you have potentially not just parents, but parents-in-law. And actually, I think one of the conceptual questions is, when do your obligations to parents-in-law end? That is, if you're widowed, do you still have obligations to parents-in-law, or do you only have them? But I would argue that less marriage, more divorce, more non-marital cohabitation, in some sense, should reduce the pool of elders that you feel obligation to. There's some suggestion, certainly in the literature, that cohabitors spend less time with parents, they're less connected, and maybe sort of less strongly connected to kind of the obligations to parents-in-law that formal marriage might bring. And that's another thing, that all of these things differ by race and SES. So the highly educated and whites are going to have parents who live longer. They're going to have also parents with lower morbidity than our blacks and others. Highly educated are the ones who are going to have their kids later, whites, and they're also the ones who are going to be more married. And so eventually, I think we want to get to being able to do some kind of decomposition or whatever. Right now, we're just thinking, wow, so many things are going to, what do we predict? People claim that sandwiching is increasing, or the likelihood of being caught between 2 generations. Can we look and see, is it or is it not? Until 2013, is my caveat, I won't have good information on time and money, the actual transfers, but I can use the PSID to assess the likelihood of being potentially sandwiched. So I have these living kin, and I want to look at 2 cohorts. I want to look at 1988, who would roughly be the parents of the baby boomers, so those are people who were born 24 to 38. And right now we're looking at 2007 only because there were a few kind of expectations of support that were asked in 2007. But really eventually we want to get to the 2013 where we'd be looking at baby boomers born 49 to 63. So those are the two cohorts in the PSID. Let's see if I want to say anything. Okay, and just to start, so what you see here is just showing how starkly different are the percent of women in those age groups who are married. So in '88, about 46% of blacks and 72% of white women were married. That decreases by 10 percentage points for blacks and stays roughly the same for whites. So other things equal, whites are going to be the ones who have mothers-in-law or fathers-in-law, and blacks are not. On the other hand, it means that whatever black women are doing, they're going to be doing it without a spouse. So if kid needs help or whatever. The third row down, the other really, really large difference are your likelihood that you, in the PSID, that you have a co-resident child at those ages. So that's actually come down a bit, but blacks are about 20% more likely to have a child living in the household with them than are whites. It's a really huge difference. And the others are sort of as you would expect. Whites on average have more parents and parents-in-law, and fertility's come down and it's closer. So to finally get, so here's one of the places I wanted to get. Can I do an estimate of who's potentially sandwiched and has it changed? And in terms of who has at least one surviving parent, our estimate is that about 39% had one surviving parent at least in '88, and that's now over half. So you're definitely more likely to have a parent alive. A little bit of a decline overall in your likelihood of having children, but still in these cohorts, most, at least in the ones we have in the PSID, most have children of some kind, 87%. Sandwiched I put in parens, but we would say that, yeah, the likelihood that you could potentially be sandwiched, if you just count parents, not parents-in-law, has gone up by about 10 percentage points for women in these age ranges. The age ranges right before retirement, potentially, with about 35% of them having both at least one living parent and a kid in '88, and now about 45%. And those levels are higher with similar kind of differential if you include in-laws in that. So at least in the PSID, and actually we've been trying to see if other data sets, so GSS has some information on parents and sort of see if these estimates align. We're having a little trouble with the HRS, but I'll go into that. This is how it looks sort of for blacks and for whites. So that, yes, blacks are less likely to have the surviving parent, and that may have widened. There was just an interesting sort of article, too, by Roshansky or something about these mortality differentials by SES. Would be consistent with that, right? But, and if I go to sort of the bottom line there, so I would say that there was about a 10 percentage point difference of having both a surviving parent and child, with blacks 10% less likely in '88, and now that's grown a bit to a 17% differential, with about 43% of blacks women in this age range, 44% having both, and 60% of women. So on the one hand, blacks by these ages are, you could say, less at risk, but the little bit I can show you, that's just the who's at risk. Who's actually doing stuff, I'll suggest that blacks may be more at risk. I just want to quickly show you a little bit on the employment level, because as I mentioned, employment was really the interest here. And another big change over this period of time is, you could argue, caregivers were who went to work. You know, women increased their labor force participation pretty dramatically in the 70s and the 80s, and they would ordinarily be the ones most likely to be giving care. And you can certainly see that. So by 2007, where I was suggesting that maybe 60% of these white women might be sandwiched compared to the, I don't know, 47% or what, they're also more likely to be working full time than they were in 1988. So 43% of women in 88 were working full time in these age ranges, and now it's 54%. Some have already retired. For black women, they have higher labor force participation, but many of them are working as well. So their likelihood of being sandwiched between two generations has gone up, and they're also more likely to be employed and to be employed full time. They're less likely to not be employed at those ages. Yeah.
It's hard to know how to interpret that, because I could imagine living parents would enable full-time work because it's a source of childcare. But the other interpretation is that these are individuals that feel pressure to continue working
because they have kids to support. Or parents to support. I think more money flows down, so I would say, although for less educated, low income, I don't know if that's as true, but certainly for the highly educated, money's flowing down. Sarah? At those ages? I don't know. You think it's not believable? Yeah.
Could be selection. These are healthier families.
It's possible it's too low for 88, although in some sense, yeah. So we should check that. Because in some sense, I would think that the 88 would be better almost, just because there's less. There are weights to adjust for attrition. We're using the weights, but there's sort of less time for there to be kind of a selective attrition in a way that, and so, yeah, that's what we really need to go back and do. Yeah. Just a quick, so did I ever get to so I don't want you to pay too much attention to money, and I'll tell you this in a reason why. But if we were to look at the co-residents now these would be for the women who have living, so the denominator would be the at-risk, they have kids and they have parents. So how many of them have somebody living with them in the PSID? They either have a kid of any age or they have a parent, and mostly it's kids. And there are huge racial differences. And actually it's come down. So in 88 it was higher. But it's much higher for black women than it is for white women to actually have co-resident kin. Now, I don't know in this, there could be some of that they're co-resident because she's already has health problems and you could have kids living with her, but more often I think it's, these are wives and heads. She has somebody living with her, a mother or a kid. The reason I say don't look at money is money's good, sort of pretty good in 88. It's differently measured in 2007. And that's why you can't really compare across time. So it's not, I don't believe that there's a decline in giving money. But you could look at the race difference within the two time points, which is why we took a quick look at it. And money is more often given by white women to kids, or it could be kids or parents. It's not frequently given by, it's not super frequently given, but it's more often given by whites than blacks. It's not comparable because in 2007 we have to rely on, there is a general question in the PSID every time it's asked about whether you give money, but it's not specified that it's to your kids or to your parents. And one thing that was learned in the 88 supplement is when you actually ask people about a designee, you get a higher reporting of that. And so in 2013, we're going to go back and actually ask people about, did you give money to your parents, and if so, which parent? Did you give money to your kids, and if so, which kids?
These are
For the money transfers, it's adults.
And how is adult 18?
18. For the,
So anybody supporting education, for example, is still giving money.
yes. Yeah, lots of money. As far as I can tell. Unless they come to a generous institution like Princeton that gives them full support. Okay, so I've just shown you pieces, but white women. So we would say it looks to us like that yes, these arguments that the potentially sandwich has grown larger has, and that the potential at least is higher for whites, but the actual burden may be higher for blacks, for minorities, and that's sort of why we want to find out about the actual transfers, what people are actually giving across generations. You look puzzled, no?
I'm
Agitated?
I'm surprised that you left one thing out, which seems to me would have changed dramatically over these two generations, and that is where you live relative to where your parents live. Because
I have left it out.
Dima was mentioning childcare. Well, you can't, you know.
You can't
if they
do
live
certain
4,000
kinds.
miles away, you
Yeah.
can't do any.
Yeah. And actually, that would be another SES differential. So the
Yep.
highly educated are more likely to live far from parents than are the less educated. And you could look at it, you could look at distance with the PSID.
It would also be interesting to look at who is forced to move.
Forced in,
Well, I mean, take care of your parents, so you move.
Oh,
You move
yeah.
back where
I
they
mean,
live, or they move where you are.
we have been, actually, Judy Seltzer and I have been trying to look at this with the HRS, sort of older mothers' proximity to adult children, at least one adult child, and then does that change over time? But yeah, we're not considering it here, but we should. Lauren, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask on a related note, do you know how long the parents have been in co-resident with the mother? Because
You
it seems
could.
to be a very different thing if they were always residing with, like,
Yeah.
from when they were raising their children to that elderly mother now moves in.
Yeah. One of the beauties of the PSID, if we were to push this farther, is you could know that because you've tracked these people for, even in '88, they would have been tracked for 20 years. But by 2013, they've been tracked for 45 years. So
Is it like a sandwiching, or was that always?
was it
their residential
there? Yeah.
location?
Yeah. I don't know that now because we haven't. And you know, our sample sizes weren't tremendously large, if you notice, but still the best there is in some ways. So what we are trying to do, and I'll show you the we in a minute, is we're going to collect time and money transfer data in the 2013 PSID. The data collection is going to be in the field starting in March, and then a year later those data will be released. And this is good for sort of those of you who are a little bit into the program but still have a long way. PSID releases data at the same time to everybody. So those who don't anticipate doing a dissertation until those out years, this stuff will come out about the end of 2014, I think. So how long's your planning horizon? It could be long enough.
Don't encourage me.
Here at Princeton, you know, life is good here. Who wouldn't want to stay? So I want to show you some information that we collected on small sample sizes and talk about sort of the. So we don't have data from the 2013 PSID, but we have done a pretest that's a real pretest, like with a representative sample pretest, not just we went and interviewed 30 of our friends with the instrument. And it will give you a sense of what data are being collected for those who are interested. So just a quick, why do we need to collect new data? Most of the estimates for a nationally representative cross-section, and Marta, you raised the issue of, with the HRS, you are in women over 50, and that was another reason why originally we were going to compare this also with the HRS, so if we picked an age range that we could then do multiple data sets. But I am amazed at how many people go back to that good Wisconsin group that did the national survey of families and households in this intergenerational transfer literature. People are still, at least in sociology, are really still using those data because of the collection about what people did and gave to kin. But the PSID itself also, it did a module, a transfer module, but it's, by the time we do the collection, it's 25 years old, 25 years out of date. So I think Lee Lillard chaired that, or was the sort of spearhead of that, but those data were collected. Now there are more recent estimates, but they tend to be a point in time from the health and retirement study, so they're always for the age group I just showed you, people over 50. And we've been looking a little bit, there's a nice descriptive piece by Charles Perret, is how I think he says his name, using the NLSYW. That was the before the NLSY 79. So for women when they were in their 50s in 2001, 2003, they asked questions about whether they were giving to children or to parents. The what and the when. So what gets transferred, you're going to see we're interested in time or money in the short term, and what's the horizon? In the short term, in the PSID, the 88 questions were geared towards last year, and so that's what we're doing in 2013. But in the 88 PSID, there were no questions on what I'm calling longer term transfers. The HRS has been experimenting with those kinds of longer term. They've asked them. So we are actually including 3 domains for a longer term in which we asked, have you helped since your child turned age 18 with educational expenses with a first home, with a home purchase or some other large transfer of $500 or more. I should say, you know, there's inter vivos transfers and then bequests. The PSID does have some information on bequests. That's not part of our module, but there will be some information in there on that. And just to show you, in 1988, Bob Shaney did a nice kind of descriptive piece with that. And what he showed at that time, that there was something like that time was more often reported as being given than money. And that, you know, about a third of households said they gave time, 28% got time. But if you looked across all households, it was much larger. Something like almost 60% of PSID households in 1988 were involved in some kind of either getting or receiving. So the incidence of it was large, actually. I'm going to skip this because we've talked about the kind of, you know, reasons why demographically some of the changes that might make one interested in what people are doing for each other. Just want to say just a little bit about here's who's involved. We're the ones who've raised the money and designed, I guess, the module for the 2113 PSID. It's a mix of Bob Shaney and Kate McGonigal are PSID PI personnel, and then it's economists and sociologists, my colleague Judy Seltzer, Emily Wamers, and Joe Hutz. And the R01 that was funded by NIA actually has 5 aims, but the first one is the most important one for our purposes here, which was to design and collect a 12-minute family roster and transfer module. I haven't sent much about the roster yet, but it's important to us actually. We're actually rostering the full set of parents and parents-in-law. And you say, why do you need to do that? You're in the PSID, you kind of know that. Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is, if you know the PSID, it has certain following rules. And so, but we also wanted to make sure that we had stepchildren. And so we're also rostering the full set of children. The way we preload anybody we know about, and then there are questions to ascertain the rest, and then get a subset of characteristics on those people. I'll show you in a minute. Then there are short-term transfers of time and money, what you gave and got in the last year, parents to kids, and then longer-term life cycle transfers. And I can talk about, there's analytic and methodological aims, but why the PSID? So in the PSID, you have multiple respondents. So this is going to be asked, if you're a PSI gened person, your parents may be responding to the survey and you may be responding to the survey. So it's possible for a subset that you would get these reports of giving and receiving, which we don't expect to look exactly the same on both sides of the transfer, and you can rarely do that. So that's one advantage. The other is that if you embed this in this kind of a survey and you've tracked families, extended kin for 45 years, you've got a pretty rich history of their economic conditions collected at the time, not because you really can't retrospect on that, so you'd have that. It has a genealogical design, so you get the PSID gene and you're followed, and if you split off, your household is followed. That's good, but it's also why we do the roster, because we want the full set of, so in the PSID, if you marry in and then you get divorced, you're gone with your kids, and we want to be sure that we get the set of those people. And also by getting a few characteristics of the full roster of parents who might need support or give support in kids, we also have some hope to do some attrition to look and see whether there's been attrition that really hasn't been well compensated for by the weights. So it will allow some better attrition work on the PSID, I think. And then the transfer questions in 88 for kids especially only asked about non-co-resident kids. But in this time, it seemed that we really want to ask those questions and not exclude people who live there. Although getting information on co-resident kids is tricky always. Okay, so here's what we've done so far. So Bob Shaney and I wrote an internal proposal to the Survey Research Center at Michigan, and were selected as the PIs to work with the Survey Practicum class in the spring term. In Michigan, it's winter term of 2012. Those of you who've been in Ann Arbor know if you start in January there, it's not spring. I got up every morning and walked across the UCLA campus between 6:30 and 7 to be video linked into the 10 to 12 class. UCLA is beautiful at that time of the morning, Eddie. And we worked with Jim Lepkowski and Brady West, who were running the class, who are really good survey samplers, et cetera, at Michigan. And the deal when you do this is the students help you. They do focus groups, cognitive interviews, but they help you design the pretest. Then it gets pre-tested, they do interviews, and then real ISR telephone interviewers pre-test, do your supplement in Richard Curtin's survey of consumers, where you get this consumer attitude about how optimistic we are or pessimistic we are. So our module was fielded in June 2012 in the survey of consumers. So we have 495 respondents, and we fielded a 10.7-minute module. They give us 10 minutes. We actually wanted to buy 2 more, and we cut the in-laws out. They will not be cut out of the PSID 2013, but they thought we were running long, and then now we've been upset with Jim and Brady ever since, because we would have had time to do the in-laws. And this is the characteristics that we got of the people in the roster. And this will be, I've tried to show you what, I'm sorry, that's my next slide. Let me see if there's anything important here that I haven't said. Probably not. It's living parents, we get stepkids, time and money. Okay. So we find out, so we asked about the age. For the children, we wanted to know their relationship not only to the respondent, but to the spouse of the respondent, marital status, educational attainment, health status, which was kind of it's not subjective and the person didn't report it, but R responded to that question. We did a question on closeness. That will not make it into the 2013 PSID, unfortunately. Homeownership. In this collection, we got distance. So, James, we can look at it. We just haven't looked at it. And co-residence, what we're going to do in the PSID is get city-state for all these kin, so you could actually connect it up with the geo stuff. And then there's a short income thing. You ask, do you think their income is under 50? And if they say yes, you say, is it under 25? And so it's hopefully something that can be reported, although there's a fair amount of missing in here. And then in the 2013 PSID, in addition, for the kids, we ask about their employment status, whether they're cohabiting, so not just marital status, but whether they're currently cohabiting and whether they're a parent. So there'll be a few more indicators. We didn't pre-test them because we were limited on time, and we wanted to try some questions that we weren't sure whether we could include, like closeness, and see how they did. In this thing, in the survey of consumers, just a cross-section, it's just a one adult respondent. So in some sense, it was to test, in the PSID, you'll know about everybody in the household. So you know a little bit about the roster. We asked, for example, if they had kids under 18, because you're only getting these roster characteristics for the over 18, and you want to know that they have kids, but I don't know how important. There's a lead-in, but if anyone wants to know, just sort of defining what are we going to include in time transfer. So there is some queuing. This is somewhat similar to what was done in '88. Not exactly, but sort of. And then the questions in 2011, they're on the phone. Did you or your family that lives there with you spend time helping your parents? And if they say yes, then it asks for amounts. And similarly on receipt. And then there are parallel sets of questions, actually in this, which asked about each child giving and receiving time. And similarly on money, again, queuing them to include sort of loans and gifts, but we're going to ask for this in the metric of money. And then during 2011, did you provide financial support worth $100 or more? The $100 or more, why? That was actually the wording in '88, and so we've retained that. And again, we follow up with amounts, and there. It does. I mean, but some people would rather have you queue on with nothing, because a low-income family, $50 might be a lot, and this would be restricting that. But this is probably going to allow you to pretty much set it wherever you want, because most amounts are going to be over 100, because as you say, it doesn't mean a lot these days, unless you're the one who needs $100. And then just, so there is sort of gifts or loans that your parents paid back for you for educational expenses. And in these questions, it was since you turned 18. So here's what happened in the pretest. That question was asked for the people. First of all, okay, now let's think about your parents, whether they're living or not, because the transfer questions of time and money last year are only with living parents. But thinking about your parents, did you ever get help for your educational expenses since you turned 18? And in this, we even tried asking them the amount. And we've decided that people can't really report very well that direction. So in the PSID, we're going to retain those questions of, did you get help? So we'd at least know if they were a recipient, with education, with housing, like your home purchase, or with any other large transfer of money, $500 or more. For the kids, we ask, have you given that to your children since they turned 18, and estimate the amount? Not easy questions, but all in. And so I'll show you quickly. So in the June data that was collected, we'd estimate that if we did it across all 495 respondents, we'd estimate that about 29% give to parents, a smaller 17% get, and money is less likely transferred. It's around 11-12%. But if the second column shows you how many people we have who have a living parent. So conditioning on living parents, we've got something like almost 2/3 reporting that they give help to their parent, but a lot of them say they give time, and the money estimates go up somewhat. And then you see our sample sizes get smaller. The third column is both your parents are alive and they're still together. And then we looked at mother alive, expecting those to be higher. What about children? How much do parents give? So here, I don't have the ends, but parent donors are, so there's around 300 who have kids, adult kids, at least one. And what we've done is we've turned it into, we have a record, we've taken them and we've made a record, there's about 800 kids. So from the parents' perspective, who reports that they gave time or money to the kids? And then on the top I have those short-term ones, and then these are their reports of the long-term ones. So just to read the table for you. So about 61% say that they gave some time. And then the second one is everybody of the how many hours, 14 on average hours, and then around not quite half say they gave money at around $3,000, and then a little over half say they gave money for education. That 11,000 includes the zeros, so I'm not showing you the conditioned ones yet, and about 22% say they helped with housing. From the kids' perspective, not every kid gets, right? So they're lower. So I can feel very overburdened. I'm giving, but I'm not giving to every one of my children. So around 40% of the kids say they got time, and about 40% of them say that they got help with education. And then we just started, because the data were collected in June of 2012. We haven't had these data very long, although it's kind of nice to get data. It's like affirming to collect data and not have to wait a year like you do in the PSID. But how equal is parental giving? I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to do with these data on this. It's really a question we have for the PSID. But there's been certainly this thinking that inter vivos giving is unequal. You give to the needy. You give to the neediest child. But there's a really interesting recent paper by Jim Smith and Julie Zismopoulos, which suggests that what we think we know about giving may be conditioned on sort of the window. And so what they do is they take the HRS, where people report about their parents, and they say, okay, how many people give to all their kids? If you look at a 2-year window, which is the one-wave reporting window, about 12% report giving something to all their kids. But then they look across 8 waves of interviewing, so a 16-year window, and then it comes up to 43%. So parents, and they also find that parents tend to give more equally in smaller families than in larger families. So we said, okay, well, we could take our respondents and say, okay, on the short-term transfers of money, and then this educational expense, which you could think of as maybe, a longer reporting window, what percent of the parents, or those who are parents, 314, say they gave to none of their kids, some of their kids, or all of their kids? And we are going to take the 1 children out of here. The sample that you would want to use you can't really be at risk of giving to more than 1 if you only have 1. At 2, you can give to 1 and not give to another. But, this is somewhat consistent with, so we have 42% saying they gave to all their kids in terms of educational expenses, whereas in the last year, money reports about 27% say they gave to them last year. Yeah, Tom.
So when you have figure after the decimal point, this suggests a high degree of precision. precision in some of these numbers. So I'm wondering.
You
how
don't
much-
think we have with 300?
Well, I'm
res-
just wondering how much noise you think are in these data. I mean, they've got some recall. I don't know how far back
Yeah.
the questions go. Some of these answers might have some social disability bias built into them. So just
Yeah.
an intuition about what range of.
Yeah, well, we certainly, our intuition was that people can't report what they got from their own parents, so that has gone by the wayside. I'm not sure. I do worry about that on the educational expenses. I think people, the farther away you get from committing those expenses, the harder it is to estimate them. And unfortunately, I mean, so the way the HRS does it is I think they don't they get a lot of information on when your kids went to school and ask just whether you help. And then they go and get data from other sources about, and they may find out which school they went to. So you could use administrative data to do that. That would have less noise. I have to hope, I guess, that the noise is that yes, there's a lot of noise, but that there's some signal in there that still is good, worth using. In these data, with 500 or 300 respondents, I don't know. And I think in the PSID, it'll probably be better for those who, for those who are giving the younger. Maybe an analyst would want to say, okay, I'm only going to look at giving to college expenses for those who have kids in the 18 to 30-year age range. And you might have the sample to do that. Here I don't. So I think that's what, I think we've convinced them. I think it's worth trying in these long-term things. I think that what will be reported probably reasonably accurately is, did you give anything? So the yes, no. So if nothing else, you could back off and say, okay, is somebody who got a giver? If you got from your parents, and is it all about socioeconomics? You're just so affluent that your parents could help you and you could help them, or are some families more giving and it transcends across? So, so we're going to get the amounts. Whether the amounts will be usable, I can't say I absolutely, yes, they're going to be usable, but we're going to get them anyway, but only going down, yeah.
Just to point out, we're in about a minute.
Okay,
So I don't know
just
if
one
you-
other thing, so with the kids, if you switch the kids where we've got some missing data. Here we've divided, you could look at, I'm a recipient kid and I live in a family where, I'm non-recipient, I live in a family where nobody gets some, or I live in a family where somebody gets them, but I wasn't the one that got it, and then I'm a recipient kid, everybody gets it, or I'm the one that got in a family where other people didn't. But, sorry, I'll end there, and
We probably have time for one question, and otherwise people can come up.
yeah.
We usually like to start with the student postdoc. They have the question, so we can start at the end. Like the one child stuff.
I did finally get back to my sandwich thing, too, with these data. Who gave to kids and parents?
Maybe had sandwiches for lunch.
I only have 100 people who were at risk, though.
Did we have one question?
Feel free if you're, yeah.
Well, so just one other measurement issue I'm wondering about. It seems given the recall over a span of 1 year would favor the recall of large sums of money or large transfers, and so recall should be better for middle or upper income families. And so I'm wondering for lower income families where a large percentage of family income may be transferred, but in very small increments over time. That I paid for your bail hearing, I bought you sneakers, or I gave you $20 for groceries.
Yeah.
It's much harder to calculate those.
I don't think we're going to capture them if they're like these really intermittent things, but there are, so the question is a standard question, but there are these Q by Qs for the interviewers so that when their screen comes up, they can take the hours or the dollars in different increments. So what happened in the pretest that the students did a lot of times is people wouldn't report how much they gave last year, but they say, well, I give my, I don't know, I give my daughter $25 a week towards groceries, or I give X, you know. So they can take an amount on the screen in a metric of either weeks, months, or last year. And then the data set will probably turn it into last year. And similarly on the time help, they can give it in other time increments with the hope that that would help respondents kind of be able to report out what they're giving. Because I think, yeah, it is an issue. But I still think, you know, if you only sporadically give $20 or even $100, it's going to be missed. I still think it's going to be the first time since 1988 where for anybody under age 50, because that's what the HRS is what we have now, you're going to know something about what people say they give in God.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. So really interesting.
Is your daughter a preacher?
No, she's
My
a
daughter,
second
PA.
year.
Yeah. My daughter's taking James Castle's. She's going to do that.
She's gonna take my course in the
Taking Epi instead. She really wants to take Epi.